In this video, we're going to practice multiplying positive and negative integers. Let's start with these two problems. What is negative 9 times 6? And what is 9 times 6? Well, if you notice, 9 times 6 is 54. But you have to be careful with the signs. This has a negative sign and this one has a positive sign. And a negative times a positive gives you negative. So you need to try to remember these rules. Negative times a positive will always give you negative. Positive and negative will always give you negative. And negative times a negative will always give you positive. If you can remember these rules, you will have absolutely no problem. Now let's warm up with a few quick ones. These will help you lock in the sign rules. Try solving these problems. 12 times negative 4, negative 7 times negative 5, negative 1 times 23. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to predict the answer. If you look here, this is a positive and a negative. A positive and a negative will give you a negative. And now, the way you solve this problem, you have to set up the problem this way. 12 times 4. And you know your final answer is negative, so you can just put the negative sign here because sometimes we always forget the negative sign, so be careful. Now, we need to multiply 4 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8, and you need to multiply 4 times 1. 4 times 1 is 4. So our final answer is negative 48. Now, what about negative 7 times negative 5? If you know your multiplication table, you can quickly multiply this number. But first, look up for the signs. Negative and negative gives you a positive. 7 times 5 is 35, and it's a positive number. And you don't need the positive sign in front of this number because we know the sign is here, but we don't need this sign. Now let's predict the answer. What is a negative and a positive? A negative and a positive will give you negative. Now, if we set up this problem like this, 23 times 1, and we already predicted our answer, which will be negative. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 2 is 2. So our final answer is negative 23. Now, whenever you multiply a number by 1, we'll always get the same number. Now go ahead and solve these two numbers. 0 times negative 38 and negative 1 times negative 1. Any number multiplied by 0 will give you 0. It doesn't matter if you multiply 1,000,000 times 0, you will always get 0. Now, a negative times a negative gives you a positive. And 1 times 1 gives you 1. So any number multiplied by 1 will give you back that number. These are the kinds of numbers or problems you might see on a quiz or test. So you can pause the video and try solving them by yourself. First thing is to try to predict the answer. This is a positive and this is a negative. So positive times a negative gives you negative. Now we can go ahead and set up this problem this way so it's easier to solve. 8 times 7 is 56. Now this number here, you have to put it under the ones place value, and this number here, you have to put it on the tens place value. So you multiply 7 times 8. Now you need to multiply 7 times 3. 7 times 3 is 21, but you have a 5 over here. So 21 plus 5 is 26. So our final answer is negative 266. Negative and a positive gives you negative. Now let's set up this problem in this way. 25 times 12. First you need to multiply 2 times 5, and then you need to multiply 2 times 2. So 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. Now 2 times 2. Alright, I need some space over here. Let's write this number over here. 47 times negative 6. Now 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1. It's 5. Now 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 2 is 2. Over here, we bring down the 0, and now we add 5 plus 5 is 10, but remember, carry the 1, and 1 plus 2 is 3. So remember the negative sign, so our final answer is negative 300. Negative and negative gives you positive. Now let's multiply 13 times 11. So here we're multiplying by 1, so that will be 3. 1 times 1 is 1. One good thing to do is always place a 0 over here so you don't get confused or cause any mistakes. Now we can times 1 times 3 is 3, and 1 times 1 is 1. Now we can go ahead and 1 plus 0, we add over here. 1 plus 0 is 0. 1 plus 3 is 4. And bring down the 1. Our final answer is a positive number, and it's 140. Alright, I need some space to solve this problem. 47 times negative 6. So let's go ahead and solve it. Let's set up the problem in this way. 47 times 6. So first thing you need to notice is this sign. Positive and negative gives you a negative. Now let's go ahead and multiply 6 times 7. 6 times 7 is 42. And now 6 times 4 is 24, plus 4 is 28. So our final answer is negative 282. Alright, here are more problems that you will encounter in a quiz or on a test. Now, here we have a negative and a negative. Negative and a negative gives you positive. So you know your final answer has to be a positive number. Let's go ahead and set up the problem this way. It's easier to multiply. 9 times 0 is 0. 9 times 3 is 27. So our final answer is 270. Positive 58 times negative 4. Positive and negative is a negative. Now let's set up the problem in this way. And let's go ahead and multiply. 4 times 8 is 32. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 3 is 23. And our negative sign, so our final answer is negative 232. Negative times a negative gives you a positive. And now let's go ahead and set up the problem. Vertically, it's easier to solve it. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 2 is 22. Our final answer is 220. And we don't need a positive sign. Negative and a positive gives you negative. Now 32 times 3. 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 3 is 9. Our final answer is negative 96. Now let's test your thinking. These problems here are multiple numbers, large values, and mixed signs. Let's try with the first problem. Alright, so the first thing we should do is group two numbers together. And now let's predict the answer. Negative and positive, we will have a negative number. So 6 times 8 is 48. And now let's multiply 48. Now we have this 2 over here. Let's multiply negative 48 times negative 2. We have two negatives, and a negative and a negative when multiplied gives you positive. So 48 times 2 will give you 96. That's our final answer, 96. Alright, let's go ahead and solve this one. Let's group 10 times negative 5. Positive and negative gives you negative. 10 times 5 is 50. And now let's multiply it with this number, negative 3. What is negative 50 times negative 3? Well, if you cannot solve it mentally, you can set the problem in this way. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 5 is 15. So our final answer will be positive 150. Alright, so the first thing is to group them in pairs. And now negative times a negative gives you a positive. And 12 times 2 is 24. Now let's multiply with the number negative 4. Alright, here we have a positive and a negative. Positive times a negative will give you negative. Now let's go ahead and solve for the answer. 24 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 2 is 8. Plus 1 is 96. So our final answer is negative 96. Alright, let's go ahead. Let's group them in pairs. 7 times negative 3. Positive times a negative gives you a negative. 7 times 3 is 21. Now let's multiply by 2. What's our final answer? Will it be a positive or a negative? Well, negative times a positive gives you a negative. 21 times 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So our final answer will be negative 42. Negative 42. Alright, you can pause the video and try solving these problems by yourself. Let's go ahead and group these two numbers. Negative 8 times negative 5. Negative times a negative gives you a positive. 8 times 5 is 40. Now, let's take this number times negative 1. And our final answer should be a negative number. So now 40 times negative 1 will give you back that same number, which is 40, but our final answer is negative 40. What about the next problem? Well, let's group the numbers together in pairs. Now negative times a negative gives you a positive. 11 times 2 is 22. Let's bring down the multiplication sign. Times a negative gives you a negative, so 6 times 1 is negative 6. Let's set up the problem in this way. It will be easier to find the answer. 6 times 2 is 12. 6 times 2 is 12 plus 1, it's 13. So negative 132 is our final answer. Right, let's go ahead and group them together. This way we can avoid many mistakes. Negative times a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 3 is 9. Bring down the multiplication sign. We have the same pair of numbers, so that will be another positive 9. And once again, we don't need the signs when they are positive, but putting the signs can help us avoid any mistakes. So 9 times 9 is 81. That's our final answer, 81. Right, let's go ahead and group them together in pairs. And let's bring down the sign. Now, positive times a negative will give you a negative. Over here, positive times a negative will give you negative. 6 times negative 7 will give you negative 42. 5 times negative 2 will give you negative 10. Now, two negatives, so we know our final answer will be a positive number. Let's go ahead and set up the problem in this way. It's easier to solve. So 0 times 2, 0 times 4 will be 0. 1 times 2 will be 2. 1 times 4 will be 4. So this will be 420, 420. That's our final answer, 420. Now let's practice some long and tricky problems. Let's start with the first one. Let's group these two numbers together, and negative times a positive, it will give you a negative. Now let's take 15 times 18. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 4, that is 12. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 1 is 1. Bring down the 0. 5 plus 2, so here we always add. 5 plus 2 is 6, and 1 plus 1 is 2. Negative 260 times negative 2. Our final answer will be a positive number. Let's take 260 times 2. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 2 is 12. 2 times 2 is 4 plus 1, it's 5. Final answer, 520. Alright, the next problem. Let's group them in pairs. In this way, we can solve them without making any mistakes. Now, positive times a negative will give you a negative. Now, let's take 21 times 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. We have negative 84. We can bring down the multiplication sign. Now here and here we have a positive, because negative and a negative gives you positive, and 5 times 1 is simply 5. Let's go ahead and multiply 84 times 5. But before that, let's look at the signs, positive and a negative. Look at the signs, negative and a positive. It will give you a negative. So our final answer is a negative number. Now 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 8 is 40 plus 2, that is 42. Final answer, negative 420. Alright, let's move on and let's solve this following problem. Let's group these two first numbers. Now, negative and a negative will give you a positive. Now, what is 100 times 3? Well, that's pretty easy. We have 3 hundreds, so that is 300. Now let's take this number, and it's a negative 1, and positive times a negative will give you negative, and it will give us back this number, which is 300. Final answer, negative 300. Alright, let's go ahead and group these two numbers. Now, negative times a negative will give you a positive. Now 11 times 7. Anything multiplied by 11, any single number like 1, 2, 9 multiplied by 11 will always give you a double number. So 7 times 11 is 77. If you times 11 times 4, it will give you, take the 4, 4, 4, so 44. So multiplying by 11 is pretty easy. Now 77 times, this is a positive and this is a negative, so we will have a negative. Now anything multiplied by 1 will give you the same number back, so that's 2, so that's negative 2. Now let's take 77 and multiply it by 2. But once again, be careful, our answer will be a negative. Now 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 7 is 14 plus 1, it's 15. Final answer, negative 54. Alright, now try solving these problems by yourself. These are the kinds of problems you will see on a test, so make sure you practice them. Now, let's pair these two numbers, and let's go ahead and predict the signs, negative, positive. This will have a negative, this will have a positive. We can bring down the sign. Now, let's take 20 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0, 3 times 2 is 6. We have negative 60. Now, let's take 5 times 2. 5 times 2 is 10. So it's a positive, so we don't need the sign. Now, what is 60 times 10? What is 60 times 10? What is 60 times 10? Whenever we multiply by 10, we always multiply like this. 6 times 1 is 6, and let's count the number of zeros. 1, 2. So that is 600. But our final answer is a negative, so it's negative 600. Alright, let's go ahead and group them like this. Now we can go ahead and predict the answer. Positive, bring down the sign. This will also be a positive. And this one we can just bring it down, it's negative 1. Now 8 times 6 is 48, and 2 times 1 is 2. We don't need the positive signs, so now we can go ahead and group them. Now 48 times 2. 8 times 2 is 16. Carry the 1. 2 times 4 is 8 plus 1 is 96. And here we have a negative number. This 96 is positive, and we are multiplying it by 1. So here we're multiplying a positive and a negative, so it will give us a negative. And 96 times 1 simply is the same number, but in this case it's negative 96. Right, let's group these two numbers together. And now 55 times 2, positive, negative, will give us a negative. Now 55, 2 times 5 is 10. 2 times 5 is 10 plus 1, that's 11. We have negative 110 times, this is negative, this is negative, it's a positive, so 3 times 1 is simply 3. Now negative and a positive will give you a negative. Let's take 110 times 3. 3 times 0 is 0. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 1 is 3. So our final answer is negative 330. Once you know the rules, it doesn't matter how big the numbers are. Multiply step by step and count your negative signs. If you can do this with big numbers, test quiz will feel very easy. Thanks for watching, and remember, learn something new every day.